Hi everyone, Ben and I are back with you for this episode of Strange Encounters Downunder, and this time we're talking about UFOs in Australia. And I'll be talking about some cases that were reported to us in Queensland, and Ben, you're going to be talking about some that were reported down in Victoria, right?
Yeah, and look, also some stuff just from around Australia, but I'm not going to Queensland, so we'll leave that up to you. But I have got some stuff that I've just sort of found, some South Australia, some Victoria, a bit of New South Wales, and I would just want to sort of say that, like, you can just draw all these cases out from all over the place. There's a lot of similarities around the whole of the country with these cases. We're going to notice that between the cases that we discussed tonight.
Yeah.
But I just sort of thought I'm going to try and find some stuff that's a little bit unusual, maybe forgotten.
Yep.
Certainly forgotten. There's no doubt about that. What we're going to talk about tonight, for the most part, is forgotten and not sort of the most popular and well-known stuff, which I think is refreshing for everybody out there to keep learning about new cases.
Yeah, well, actually, the cases I'm going to talk about, like there's an entity case, a missing time case, a couple of cases where vehicles are paced by UFOs. And I don't think these have seen the light of day as yet. They haven't been published. And these are cases that were reported to me by UFO Research Queensland going back into the 90s and early 2000s. So let's kick it off. Why don't you start with something?
Yeah, no worries. So I'll just also, before I say that, I've also got a couple of police cases too, which I always love the police cases. So I want to talk about a case from around about the 5th of December, 1977. It's basically a trace landing case, which I personally love trace landing cases because you've actually got something that you can go and physically look at in conjunction to recording witnesses' testimony as well. So, and sort of unfortunately in modern times, in certainly the last 10 years that I've been involved in Victoria, we haven't had really any trace cases reported to us. But historically in Australia, there's been hundreds, if not thousands of them.
Yeah.
So and this little case I'm about to read out, and it's not that long. It's kind of really, really typical of probably another 200 cases that would have been reported around Australia. And it's very much like that. But I suppose what I like about it is that, it's not just, you're not just talking about an area where it looks like a couple of cows have sat down and flattened out an area, and it's not like it's like some dust devil or willy or even a twister has been in the area at the time when these cases have been reported. So that's something that I really like about the good quality trace cases. So this little case, I call it the little case, is from the 5th of December 1977 from a town called Leachville, which is about 50 kilometres north of Echuca. And Echuca is, for those playing at home, Echuca is in central Victoria. Central to northern Victoria is where it is. Quite a big town, and many people holiday there from Melbourne, so it's quite a well-known town in its own right. But back on the 5th of December in 1977, going back in time, and remember during the 60s and the 70s, these cases were very, very common. So this is right from that classic time period for ground trace cases. So a farmer called Tom Church was out one morning at 9 a.m. in a paddock that was about 1.2 kilometres from his house, which gives you a bit of an indication how big the farms are out in that area as well. So it's not like it's just the paddock next to the house. This is 1.2 kilometres away, and even that's not big distances in Australia. But 1.2 kilometres is still, I would regard, as a significant distance from the homestead. So, having said that, it means that no one actually saw or heard anything, which is also intriguing about these cases. So what he found was a circular burnt patch. And it was actually a dairy farm that he had, and the patch of the burnt patch was 9 meters across. So 9 meters is a fairly significant sort of a distance in my mind, and probably what you would say could be a classic, almost flying saucer size, 9-10 meters. Maybe to go out to 20 meters, but that's a pretty much a good sort of a size, and that's bigger than a car. So cars aren't 9 meters across. So this is a big area, And it had interestingly enough, on the outside, it had a 45 centimetre outer burn around the ring. So the outside of the ring, 45 centimetres, which is nearly half a metre, was a black burned ring around that. And then through the body of the circle, and I don't have a photo of it, unfortunately, there was some burnt patches within the circle as well. And they described it as looking like something completely unnatural, certainly not a natural weather event of any kind, certainly not animal activity. And these are farmers, and don't forget, they do know weather and they do know animals. So it puzzled him and his son. And his son had found a smaller circle, about 1.2 centimetres in diameter, a few weeks prior to that in another paddock. And there had been similar reports across the Mallee region around that time of these types of cases. So it's really intriguing because the big thing that comes up most often is fairy rings. So fairy rings are naturally occurring and rings that appear due to fungus or mushrooms and that sort of activity. These rings appear, and they often are smaller rings, perhaps around 1.2. But I'm not saying that's what he saw. But when you get something that's 9 meters across, flattened and burnt around it, I think you're stepping away from the realm of the fungi, personally.
Mm.
So, so that's what I like about that case. Now, I've been through my records, and there are like ching, 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 ching. You can just find those cases just everywhere from that time period. And these farmers are, back in those days, they weren't necessarily going out of their way to report things, but they would say things if it came up as something unusual. And this, for him, came up as something unusual on his property at that time. Now, at the worst end of that, you'll get a whole heap of locals coming out and just trekking across your paddock and standing there taking photos and all that sort of stuff. And maybe it's not too bad if a few neighbours do that. But if you get lots of people pulling up and, virtually a sideshow attraction, farmers are less happy with that type of attention. And I think that might be why we don't see these cases getting reported so much now, or a reason.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Might also be because some of those cases, those types of cases with those details in them, are just not happening now too.
No.
I tend to lean towards that idea. I don't think people have stopped reporting them, just that they're just not happening.
No, I that's what I think. I agree with that too. I think, that is definitely the case. We are not seeing that activity from the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, I suppose, was still...
Or the 90s.
Or even the 90s, you still had that. But once you hit the 2000s, from the 2000s up, you tend not to see it coming through anymore. And that really, really puzzles me.
Yeah.
That there's those consistent reports. And that one is absolutely a textbook trace landing case in a rural setting. Yeah.
Well, actually, the case that I want to present has similarities because it also occurred on a farm. It's a missing time case, involves missing time. It was reported in August 1998. So today I've gone back through our telephone log books and other records to just pull out a few that I thought, haven't seen the light of day for a long time, if ever. But this one actually occurred in 1949, 1950. So it was the witness she lived on the family farm as a child. They had 50 head of cattle, and it was her job to go round up the cows for milking. So I guess on a daily basis. So she jumped on a horse and went out to gather the cows. But when she returned, there was a realisation by either she or her parents. It wasn't quite clear in my notes, actually, but I was the one who took those notes. Anyway, they realised that there were about 8 cows missing from the herd. So she jumped back on a horse and returned to the paddock to go out and gather them. And when she got there, she saw a circular silver object moving away from her. And she said it was floating about 3 feet above the grass, what's that? How many? That's 90 centimetres, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just under a metre.
Yeah. So, sorry, people, but I'm a little bit older than Ben, so I'm still in the feet and inches process.
I can metric to your imperial.
Yes. Can you do that?
As best as I can, yeah.
Convert as I go along. So, she said it was about 12 to 15 feet in diameter. What's that?
That's about 4 meters.
Okay, right. And it was silent, making absolutely no noise.
Yeah.
And as it moved away and went higher, as it got to tree height, it turned on its side and just vanished.
Now, turned on its side. That's interesting.
Turned on its side. So classic, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Anyway, so then it just vanished. So I'm guessing it just took off so fast that her eyes couldn't even register its movement. Or it just disappeared. You know, who knows what alien physics is all about. But anyway.
And I find that really interesting with UFO report witnesses, get the word out, Ben, that they, and it's one point I always struggle with them, and I've done it many times, is to say, now, when you say it disappeared, did it just disappear, or did it shoot off, or you're just not sure?
Well, I think we know it doesn't just disappear. Something that's been there just doesn't disappear. No. So they may have been able to, manipulate time and space, or cloak, or, do something else. I don't really know, but it just vanished. And when she returned, her parents asked where she'd been, because the cows had already returned, but there was a half hour of time missing from when she left to get the cows to her return, more than was expected. Now, her mother said to her that she must have been running the cows because they had no milk. Anyway, later she went back to inspect the area where she'd seen the object in the paddock and discovered a burnt ring on the ground. But anyway, another story she said after that was later in life, she married a teacher, and they lived at just outside of Gatton in Queensland, which is about 90 kilometres west of Brisbane. See, I converted the kilometres.
Well done.
Yes, it was 1 a.m. and she and her husband had woken up and soon realised that the insects had stopped making noise. Didn't know why they woke up. They just woke up, and then the insects just stopped. Then they saw a bright light coming through the top of the house, and it disappeared. But her husband got up, got his gun, kept it next to the bed, and then they went back to sleep. Anyway, the next day they discovered a mark up one side of their house that was black, like it had been burnt. It's interesting. I haven't heard a lot of that.
No. It's like a heat effect, perhaps.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Possibly a weatherboard house or something like that.
But the other part of this story is they had 2 little kittens, and the next day one died and the other died a few days later. So whatever it was had some sort of, physical effects on the environment, with the burn on the house and the animals dying, which is very sad, but that's what happened.
Yeah, wow. That's an unfortunate effect. And I'm sure there's other cases out there with a little bit of research where you would find that sort of effect on animals as well, outside of the cattle mutilation, type of thing. But it's like they've obviously had some sort of a interaction, or whether it's heat, radiation, or who knows what it is. And especially like a little animal like a kitten or a bird, or you hear of dead birds in cases. So maybe those smaller animals out there can't actually handle being close to the proximity to these craft.
I've heard of dogs losing their hair, things like that.
So that's all very, very intriguing as well, isn't it?
It is. Go on, what's your
okay? Well, we'll just this is UFO ping pong tonight. So
one for me, one for you.
One for you. And I must admit, most of these cases I'm going to talk about, I don't know intimately. So as in, I haven't personally investigated them, but I find the general story around them all to be interesting. So. And this next one I'm going to talk about is 2 police officers on an early morning patrol in the Adelaide Hills twice saw a mysterious flying object in the Adelaide sky. And so this is actually made it into the newspapers, which I also find interesting for police officers as well, that they're being reported to the point where they're going to get into the public domain. I can imagine police reporting it to their commanding officers and they say, right, well, we'll just take that out of the log. I could understand that happening. But back in the day, and this case is actually the Adelaide News, Tuesday, November 21st, 1961. So that's going back into a period of time where I would say that, well, it's quite funny, it's a very rigid time back in the early 60s was perhaps a rigid time in terms of religious belief, and people sort of took what the government said a bit more than they will now. So for a policeman to come out and talk about it, same as like a minister, like happened in Cressy in Tasmania in 1960, they're seeing something that's worth talking about in those times. But first of all, it was described as appearing as a cluster of stars, and later more distinctly as a flat object with a long tube on top. And Constable P. Collins of Burnside and R. Snowden of North Adelaide first saw the object about 4:15 a.m., which is a classic time for police to see strange things in the sky, when patrolling the Blackwood area in a police car. And it was just before sunrise, and a few clouds were scattered across the sky. But the brilliant moon made visibility very good. And from their hill vantage point, they both saw what they described as a cluster of stars in the western sky just above the horizon. So heading out of Adelaide towards Western Australia. And the cluster reflected the moonlight and appeared to skim above sea level in a northerly direction past Merino, Seacliff and Brighton areas in Adelaide. And then it disappeared. And a few minutes later, while at Windy Point, Constables Snowden and Collins again saw the object, this time more clearly. As they looked out over the city, they saw a bright, long, flat shape with a bubble design on top, travelling from 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock across the face of the moon. And it took about 30 seconds to complete this course. Then it disappeared again. The constables described the object as well-defined and about an eighth of the moon's diameter in size, and they were both puzzled by it. And they quoted them by saying, "We discarded the theory that it was a cloud formation or a flock of birds. We checked with the airport officials. There was no aircraft in the sky above Adelaide at the time of the sightings. And a Bureau of Meteorology official said he could not find any explanations for the reported sighting by the police officers."
Classic shape, eh? Classic shape of the object.
Yeah. And, it is just what you'd call, in some ways, a lights in the sky sort of case, but it's perhaps the witnesses that is the most interesting point about this encounter.
Yeah, but also the shape too. They said long, flat with a bubble on top. I mean, that's
yes,
classic. 19 what was it? 60s spaceship,
flying saucer.
Yes, like straight out of the Jetsons.
Straight out of the Jetsons and straight into your living room.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's exactly what it's sort of like. So yeah, you've got a classic disc-shaped object, flying by police officers seen in two locations on the same night. So, that's it's interesting. And around that time, that really was that classic report, wasn't it? That metallic disc style thing with a bubble. So.
And I think it's really good that there were two of them, so that was corroborated.
Absolutely. I think that is very true. Very true. That is it.
And that's something that we always look for when we're, it's nice when you get it, put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've zimmed across to Adelaide.
Yeah. Okay.
And we can zim back around somewhere else.
Yeah.
And,
the next couple of cases that I've got, and I have to say, when I was going through the records today, I came across so many reports of objects pacing vehicles. It was incredible. I thought I have to talk about this. So this was on the Sunshine Coast, or going to the Sunshine Coast, and it had actually occurred in September 1998. And a man was driving north from Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast on the Bruce Highway at 7 p.m. And he saw a set of lights starting to follow his car. And he said there were about 40 lights that were spherical and they were blue in colour. And he said they were about 200 to 300 metres above the ground. And when he came near to Caboolture, which is about 50 kilometres north of Brisbane, they picked up speed and continued to follow at an elevation of 70 degrees. Now, remember, that when and I always say this to people who call and report UFO sightings trying to get the degrees, is your body and the Earth makes a 90-degree angle. So, you're looking at the degrees, every 10 degrees from the flat horizontal Earth up to directly above you. So 70 degrees is about, that much.
Yeah, about that point, yeah.
Yeah, so that's quite high.
Mm.
Anyway, he estimated that the group of lights themselves, this is the whole group, spanned about 40 metres across, and he guessed that each would have had to be about 2 metres across, and they're all travelling at that fixed altitude. So you've got this bunch of 40 lights taking up a space of about 40 metres across in the sky behind, I think he was, travelling, or slightly to the side. And he estimated they were about 2 metres each across. And there were three witnesses who reported seeing the same thing, who were with him at the time, so 2 other people. So, but the next day, now that was at 7 p.m. The next morning at 2:10 a.m., we received another report of a car being followed. A woman was driving on the Bruce Highway again, and we had a lot of reports from that area, when she saw 2 rows of lights like dashes in the sky. Now, these days when someone says that, that's what they've seen, I go, oh, Starlink satellites, right? But and I received some photos sent in by a witness yesterday, exactly that. But in 1998, we didn't have that.
No.
That wasn't happening.
No.
So she saw 2 rows of lights like dashes in the sky. Then she saw 4 rows of dashes in a circle, right, with 20 lights in each row, or about 20 in each row. And they were pulsating from a large to small glow. And at that time of the morning, she could really slow down to get a good look at them. So she slowed to 10 kilometres an hour. Might sound a bit strange these days, slowing down on a main highway, but in 1998, you could do that on the Bruce Highway. There wouldn't have been another soul in sight at that time of the morning. Anyway, as she slowed, the lights slowed too. And she felt they were really close, only about 200 feet from her. Sorry, what's that conversion, Ben?
Well, that's a fair distance away. Yeah.
And they were completely silent.
Yep.
Now, she travelled along very slowly and she observed them for about 10 minutes. Then they just turned off. Another classic case of just disappearing, turning off like someone's turned a light switch off.
Yeah.
Just knows what that is.
No, and you think about when the light actually pulses, so it goes through, it dims and it glows, which I've seen with my own eyes.
Yeah.
You sort of wonder. You got to wonder, what is that? Is that a propulsion effect? Is that something to do with the propulsion system? I mean, why would a light do that? Like none of our lights really do that on anything that we have. Like all our LED lights are pretty constant, whether it's on an aircraft or on a ship or on a car. Nothing really sort of has that type of effect. So that's interesting. And I said with the first one, he said each light was about 2 meters across. That's a reasonably big area, I would have thought. And 40 of them, that's a big.
That's a lot. And feeling that they're only 200 feet away, I mean, that's quite close.
Yeah, it is. It's
very close.
That's the closest. Yeah, very close.
Yeah. And the other case, which is another pacing vehicle, so I'll just follow on because it's the same.
Yeah.
It occurred in December 2001, 9 p.m. At a place called Fernvale, which is about 45 minutes west of Brisbane, out near Wivenhoe Dam. Anyway, a man was driving when he saw a light about 1 kilometre from him, and it looked like it was on the road in front of him, but then it just jumped up in front of him by about 20 feet, and then it moved over the tree line. Now, as he kept driving, it seemed like it was pacing him. And at times he got closer. When he got closer, it naturally appeared brighter and bigger. Well, that's just normal, I think. But he got to about 700 metres within it, and the lights on the object began turning red, then white, and then an orangey, vivid colour. And when the object was on the road in front of him, it was ultra bright white. When he got closer, it also changed to a softer amber colour. So it followed him from Burallen Prison, which is 10 kilometres from Fernvale, all the way to Ipswich. Now, don't ask me how long that is, but no more than 30 minutes, I don't think, driving. But anyway, he had the presence of mind to call his wife, and I love it when witnesses do this sort of thing. It's so good. And when he called her, she said she could see the object too. So she was already at Ipswich, and she could see it from where she was. So anyway, the object then went past Fernvale out towards a place called Esk, and seemed to come back around to Fernvale, then sped up towards Ipswich. And then the last time we saw it, it appeared to be stationary. Now, that could be because, just because of the way he was travelling, it just looked like it was still in the sky. We don't know. He didn't know. He just said that's what it appeared to be. Anyway, when he got home, he called the Amberley Air Base, but their tower was closed, but he was told that the location at that time was in restricted airspace. So nothing should have been in the area of where he was describing this thing was moving around and at times pacing his vehicle. So that was a very interesting one too.
One thing I find very interesting in car travel, cars being paced, is something on the ground rising up and following the car, right? Or something comes from above and follows the car. So that's two different things. And you'd say that happen chancing across a car is just completely random, particularly out in remote areas. Like, they're not sitting next to a constant road with cars flying. So these objects are in remoter areas or less populated areas. It's on the ground doing whatever it's doing. Okay. Then a car goes past and it goes, oh, wow, we better check that out. So it takes off and it follows the car for half an hour or a kilometre or how long, or all night long in some case, whatever it is. It takes a direct interest in that vehicle and it follows it and behaves in all sorts of different ways, as opposed to another one that's you're just driving along and the next minute something comes down over the top of you, which I've got cases of that around here, where an object has come down and descended onto a car and lit it up from behind and followed it and then flown over the top of it and taken off into the ether.
Yes.
So it's interesting to, that's, how and why are they following the cars? You think it's probably curiosity. That's what comes to mind for me. It's pure conjecture.
Don't know, but all we know is that they do it. I mean, I know there was a case, I think it was in South Australia where, I think it was, I don't have the details, it wasn't my case, but the rear windscreen was sucked out of the back of a car by a UFO. That was a daytime case. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember something about a car getting a window sucked out. And I think that there might have even been a case down here of that in Melbourne. I think I've heard that. I've definitely heard of that type of thing before.
Well, it could have even been in Victoria.
Yeah. And the old Rolodex gets a little rusty, but I've definitely heard of car windows being sucked out, cars being attached to. Not just Mundrabilla case, which is probably the most famous one with the Knowles family, but I've heard of other lesser known cases where people have reported some type of attachment to attachment or even contact with. In fact, probably about 40 minutes east of where I am, in a little timber town called Nowanower. This is during the day. A lady was driving along, and this thing rose up next to the side of the road, and it actually flew across, and it hit her car, and then it took off in another direction. So she had a contact with an object that rose up, came over her car, touched the car, and took off. So that was a case to the lady who ran the post office in that town,
right?
Which is really interesting. But I'm going to continue this theme that we've got going of cars and UFOs, because this really dovetails very nicely with that. And I've jumped out of order just to insert it right now. So this is a night patrol policeman who claimed that he was followed for about 20 miles by a bright light in the skies near Traralgon, which is Latrobe Valley, central Victoria, 100 miles east of Melbourne. And his sighting was the second within a month in that district at that time. I think this is about 1972. So very active time. And the patrolman was Lawrence Picton, 32. He said he had been followed from Moe to Traralgon by a light which turned red and then shot up into the sky. He said, I still don't know what it was. He said, after making checks of searchlight alarms from the drive-in theatres and the garages, all I know is that there was a light which should not have been there in an area where there was no other street lighting. And he followed the light to Rosedale, which is the next town east from Traralgon, about 14 miles away, where with a local photographer, they watched it until about 6 a.m. and they took a photograph of it, which is not available. And he first saw that light at 4 a.m. And they said, I don't know what to make of it, but I'm sure it wasn't a star and certainly not in the daylight. So that's policemen saying, again, I've been followed by something for 20 miles, on my patrol car.
Yes, yeah.
So they're attracted to cars. They are attracted to cars.
All the lights from them.
Or the lights from them, exactly right. Because you also hear about them, reacting to searchlights or even torches. Like people report that UFOs respond to torches sometimes. And I think that's happened on beach areas and lonely areas. So they're quite attracted to sort of light, like moths.
Well, I guess it's a sign of intelligence, and they may want to go and check out what the heck's that. Who knows?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So. And just, and I've spoken about this case before in many other forums, and it was probably a couple of months earlier than that particular one down in Sale. A policeman saw an object descend when he was on patrol, and he went and grabbed the RAF, went to the RAF base, and they came out with him. And then the object came back and hovered over them. And when it took off, the light was still remaining over the car after the object had departed. That was also in 1972, and a couple of months around that time of that case that I just read out. So that was a real flat time in Victoria. So I've spoken about that case on many, many occasions, but it's very, very interesting, and I love those really good witnesses, farmers, policemen, the ones that are just, they're not prone to fantasy or
they're grounded.
Yeah, they're grounded, and they generally know what they're looking at too, for the most part. A couple of people at a party stumble off the black porch and look up at the sky and see the International Space Station and then report it, and you've got to try and figure out what it was. Trying to avoid those sort of reports. Which I'm still not belittling anyone's report, because I appreciate people making reports and giving us the opportunity to investigate them. But you certainly need to pick your way through the ones that are worthy of attention.
Yeah. Do you have any more cases of cars being paced? An entity case. I'm just going to switch gears. So I just wondered.
Well, look, I'm happy to switch gears too.
Okay.
No. Sorry, I have got one more.
Okay, let's go for it then.
I've got one more car case, and this one, folks, occurred in my hometown, here in Bairnsdale, East Gippsland, Victoria. And it occurred in May 1966, which is a massive year for UFOs in Australia. And we won't go into that. If you're listening to this, you probably should already know that. But this is another interesting little case that involves a person driving in a car. And this time it was actually a woman. And her name was Mrs. Martin of Wallace Street in Bairnsdale. That was back in the day when they used to publish people's addresses in the paper quite readily. She was returning home on Sunday night in her car from visiting a friend. And when a mysterious bright green light shot out of the darkness. and it travelled at great speed from behind the picnic point hall and approached Mrs. Martin's car. And her first thoughts were to return to the home that she had visited, because she must have rattled her a little bit, as you could understand. And she continued the journey, stopping at the corner of Moroney and Brett Streets, from which locality the object was clearly visible, and literally hopping across the housetops. So this green light was hopping across the housetops, which is an interesting behaviour. And at one stage, it was sitting over the top of the houses, looking at me. So there you go, curiosity.
Mm.
The object darted at the car, and I've heard this before. Okay, so the object darted at the car, and had I not seen it, I would not have believed it, she said, which is a classic witness statement. It had every resemblance of what other reports refer to as flying saucers. The object was round in shape and transmitted bright green lights at intervals as it moved off at tremendous speed. So, and where she's talking about is from Wallace Street down to Brett Street. It'd barely be a kilometre. Like it's not a long distance from where her house was to where her friend's house was, and she's come up over this hill, and then this thing's appeared. This green light's appeared, and it's hopped across the houses. Okay, hovered there and looked at her, and then it's taken off at great speed. What is that?
Yeah, it just leaves you're scratching your head, doesn't it? There's so many reports that don't seem to make any sense from our vantage point anyway. And you go, what? Why? You know
what and why? In 1966, this is when this occurred. Which is so that's after Burke's Flat, after Westall School. Like being only the very next month from Westall. Westall was 6th of April 1966. So this is the 13th of May 1966. So that was a very active period. And again, we've got a car being followed. And I've been to that location. I was going to make a little video on the case too. When I had a spare time, we even went there one night, and I did some filming around that intersection and caught a few reflections that look like the green light. So I've got this video I can probably make and put together to tell that story a little bit more dramatically.
Yeah.
So, but let's switch to entities, because I have also got a really peculiar case that's come from the depths of the vault. But I'm happy for you to kick off.
Okay, sure. Well, this one, let me think, where is it? This one actually came in just 2 days ago, even though it occurred in 2009 at Aspley, which is in North Brisbane, okay? And it was between 1 and 3 a.m., so the early hours of the morning, when a man was awakened by a flashing light, strong enough to light up the bedroom, and also a strange sound like a low humming noise with a slight oscillation which seemed to be in sync with the flashing lights. Now, you and I have heard people talk about low humming noises being heard over houses many times. I'm sure you have too, Ben.
Yep. Yes.
Over the years, it's not uncommon. What I don't understand is, why is it over neighbourhoods in cities? What's that about? But anyway, he felt very strange, as if time had been altered in some way, and he had a feeling of dread. While he didn't see a craft of any kind, he said it was as if the craft was just above the house and the house was within its physical sphere of influence. And he sensed that normal time had somehow slowed or stopped, and he was now experiencing a different passing of time. That was just a feeling he had. And I can relate to that, because I've been in a situation where I've had that sense of no time, and I've heard other witnesses talk about a sense of no time as well. Anyway, his first instinct was to get up and see what the hell was going on. I mean, wouldn't you? Yeah. So he walked from the bedroom into the hallway, and all of a sudden he heard footsteps running towards him. And when he looked towards the sound of the footsteps, he saw a short creature which was humanoid-like. Now, his memory was a little sketchy, because this was 12 years ago, but he thinks it was grey in colour, but not the typical grey alien that's reported by many people. He said its face was similar to a human face, but it looked demon-like. So, make up your own demon image if you want to. Who knows what exactly that was.
Yeah.
Anyway, as it approached him, it jumped up towards his chest. So he braced himself and closed his eyes, but he felt no impact. And he opened his eyes and it was just gone. Again, don't know where, don't know when either. So he was really confused and he just wasn't sure where it went. So, and he wondered, did it go through him? Did it disappear? He just had no idea. Anyway, he noticed some other entities standing behind him. And when he turned around, the two small entities, he saw two small entities, but he can't recall their features because he wasn't really looking directly at them. There was another tall entity standing directly behind him, and he said it was female, slightly taller than him, and he's 185 centimetres in height. I got that conversion right too.
Yeah. That's good. That's pretty tall, reasonably tall.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And she had very white skin, but not like a Caucasian human, but the actual colour white. And her eyes were maybe slightly larger than a human. They were dark or black, but they weren't large eyes like many witnesses often report. And she was wearing a robe, which I find intriguing because I don't know how many reports I've heard of during the 90s in abduction cases, particularly where people reported entities wearing robes appearing to them. Anyway, he described her as very thin. Her head size was about the same proportion as a human, but it was slightly pointier, like an upside down triangle shape, but it was organic. It wasn't sharp like a triangle. And he thought she had long hair, but again, he wasn't 100% sure of that. For some reason, she had a calming effect on him. So he wasn't alarmed at all, which is interesting again, because this often happens where people can be frightened, but then somehow they have these feelings wash over them where the fear disappears and they become calm. Personally, I think that is, that's something that's emitted from these beings, whatever they are, to calm the humans. And I guess, we're more easily managed when we're calm. When we're freaking out and going crazy, you can't manage people like that. Hence the UFO cover-up, I might say.
Yeah, we live in fright or flight, don't we? So
exactly.
Fight or flight. Sorry, yeah. That's where we, when we get a fright, that's the two reactions.
Yeah. So anyway, he says to her, "What the hell was that?" referring to the small demon creature, but she just didn't respond. Again, I've heard that before, where some of these aliens or entities are just don't respond to the human questions. Anyway, but in an instant, he found himself standing in the middle of a desert. His initial thought was to figure out where the hell he was now, and he looked up and around and saw no life of any kind, just dirt and rock. He could breathe, so he said there was obviously oxygen in the atmosphere, and he was sensing danger, but he couldn't see any danger, but that was his feeling. I think you would, if you're taken out of one location and suddenly thrust into another, you'd feel a sense of, what the heck's going on, and maybe this is really dangerous,
Absolutely.
Yeah, so at this point, he went into fight or flight mode, like you just said. And he said it was as if they had somehow placed him there for some purpose, but he didn't know what it was. So he sort of checked around to see if he'd been provided with anything for survival, but there wasn't anything to be seen. Now, this is where it gets really interesting for me, because he said he then felt the sun starting to burn through his skin. Now, it wasn't like Earth's sun, but what did you get from that? But he said it was like he was receiving a very high dose of radiation, and he looked at his arm and he saw it turning red, and within seconds he fell to the ground. At this point, that experience ended, and he was back at home at around 5 or 6 a.m., so a few hours after it all began. Now, he said his personal body clock was telling him that 3 days had passed. He didn't know why he thought that, but that's what he felt, even though he only remembered a few minutes worth of the events, Now, his thoughts were that it could have all been a dream, except that he had a burn mark on his arm the next day. Wow. So here's some sort of corroborating mark on his body that whatever he was placed into, he had some sort of evidence of it on his own body. And I think that's something. What it is, I don't know, but it's something.
And that's the evidence that we get, isn't it? I mean, no one's brought back an alien pen or a notepad, or people aren't coming back with physical items. They're coming back with the effects on their bodies.
Yep, that's right. That's right. And it could be things like scoop marks, scratches, scars, which I didn't have the day before. All sorts of things. I mean, I remember when Bud Hopkins was out here in Australia, and I went to his lecture in Sydney, and that was in the late 90s, and he was showing images of people who had huge grazes on their bodies, on their thighs, on their backs, as well as all those other things I just described. So, yeah, when you have people sort of presenting that with that sort of those markings, it's hard to deny that something didn't go on,
That's right, exactly. Something has happened, but particularly with something unusual, scoops or triangular or rashes or burns or whatever that are beyond an easy explanation.
Yeah.
Well, we've certainly left the car chasers behind.
We have.
We've left the car chasers behind, and we've gone down some very, very interesting roads. Was that a one-off experience, or did he have repeated experiences?
No, he had other experiences, but he said that was he actually sent this one in an email just 2 days ago. Communicating, and I've been getting his permission to publish it anonymously, so that was okay.
Yeah.
We're sort of just at that phase, and that's the first time I've actually spoken about that. Yeah. So more to find out, but he did say that was the most prominent experience he'd ever had.
The other intriguing thing I find is like when he is asking them what's going on, or asking a question and he's not being responded to. I find that if he's asking that question, vocalizing it, then perhaps that to them that's not something that they pick up on. His lips are moving, but I can't hear what you're saying because you've got to ask me the question from here.
Yes, that could be that too. Yeah.
You've got to ask the question as an internal question, not a oh my God, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So they're just not going to respond to that. That's going to sound like just babble to them.
When we're trying to understand what's going on from a human perspective with some sort of entity which we might call alien, we've got to think outside the box. Now, we don't know how an alien thinks, how they, we don't know that. So we're sort of just grappling.
Yes.
Trying to understand it with our, with context from our own worldly domain.
Another thing I find interesting in a lot of contactee or abduction reports is the use of English, because to my mind, if you're talking to entities from wherever and you're speaking in English, it's got to imply one or two things: that they actually understand and speak English, right, as one possibility, or it's not the fact of the language; it's the fact that they in tune into your mind and know what, and have a knowing about what the question is, or knowing about what you want to know, and the language is irrelevant to it. But I've heard of people being responded to in English as well.
Yeah, that's really, really curious. The other thing I've received is reports where people have said that they've been communicating with aliens who had a box on their chest, and they wondered whether it was actually some sort of a translating device. Even though they were still communicating telepathically, that the human might have been speaking, but in their own mind, of course, like you say, they're thinking in English. And somehow they thought this device helped them translate it.
And that might vary from entity to entity as well.
Exactly.
There's a whole range of entities that are interacting with humanity. From those that are only 1 degree more advanced than us, to the ones that are just completely light years ahead of us and understand what you're saying, whether you're speaking Chinese, Japanese, English, or Swahili.
Yes, yeah. And even if as some propose that they are time travelers and that they are us coming from the future coming back, then they still would have evolved a language. The language would have evolved over, a long time.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have a direct conversation with someone from the 13th century England. You just could not. You could not have a direct conversation. That's only a couple of hundred years ago, really, a few hundred years ago. Well, you could not talk to someone.
That's right. Old English, if I read anything in Old English, I go, what? What was that? I have no idea what it said, Yes, it's crazy, but there you go.
Have you ever tried to read Shakespeare? It's very, very hard to read, to sit down and read for pleasure, unless you're some thespian who really enjoys that sort of thing. You just don't pick up that.
That's right. Yeah.
You got to reread every line twice just about to sort of to drag out anything out of it. So, you're talking a few hundred years difference between from those time periods to now, and we can barely understand humans from the past. Yeah. How are we going to understand humans from an indeterminate point in the future?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
They're not going to be speaking the English that we speak today. So, so I've got something that's I reckon is really intriguing. And it's just it's a really unusual, let's call it an incident rather than a case. And this had a whole there's a whole lot of sightings around this time in this area as well. So this didn't just occur as an isolated event. There was a whole host of strange activity occurring. And the area that we're about to go to, and the time period, again, is 1972. So that's a massive year in Australia for UFO activity. And the area that we're going to is Kempsey in New South Wales.
Been there?
Yeah, I don't think I've been there unless I went there when I was young on a couple of trips when I was 10 up to Queensland. I don't know if I've actually been there or not. But this is in Kempsey in the early 70s. And it's the tale of a man seeing, I'll give you the short version first before I do some of the more in-depth on it. Basic story is a man is standing in front of his kitchen window where the sink is, and he looks out the window and he sees a face in the window. And next minute, he is sucked literally through the window and lands on the ground on the other side of what is a very small window. You're not talking a big modern window. You're talking like a nice little boxed window from the 1970s in a fibro or a weatherboard house. So he's literally sucked out through the window. And he was age 34. He fell 7 feet to the ground outside his home, but he was unhurt except for minor cuts on one hand and an arm. So I'm going to read a bit of information about it that I've unearthed. And the man, terrified, told his wife he saw a strange, small, saucer-shaped face at the window and that he was drawn out through the glass by some unknown force. His wife, aged 26, says she heard glass breaking in the kitchen sometime after 10 p.m. and thought her husband had broken crockery and glassware drying on the sink. She ran outside and saw his legs and she saw his legs and hips disappearing horizontally through the top half of the bottom window. Kempsey, 1972. The incident came a few hours after a number of Kempsey people reported sightings of a strange bright light in the western Kempsey sky between 6:10 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. on the same day. The man whose name was not being published wanted to sort of keep his identity to himself, vows he will not live in the house again. And he is now in Sydney, this is at that time, and wants his wife to go there with him. She says she can't go because of the children and she'd prefer not to stay in the house, but there is nowhere else for her to live. And I am scared, she says. I don't like it. I sleep with the blankets over my head and I guess I'm scared too. The woman basically said that, just reading through a little bit more, 10 o'clock after watching, my husband went to bed and was playing with the baby. He got up and went into the kitchen to have a drink of water. He didn't turn on the light, but he said afterwards he tipped his head back and saw the little face pressed up against the window. It had no hair and it looked like a small saucer. It had features, but he did not describe them. He doesn't remember much about going through the window. He said he was sucked out by some force. He fell out at the bottom of the steps on his back. I ran outside after she saw him passing through the window and she thought that he would be stunned, but he wasn't. And he wasn't even winded after falling 7 feet to the ground. He jumped up and ran like hell down to the gravel, a stockpile near the houses. I ran out after him and he was crying and shaking, and I thought he had the horrors and told him so. I went to go back to the house and he asked me not to leave him there. He was so frightened. The woman said she had gone to the hospital with her husband where a stitch was inserted in a cut in a finger on his right hand, and she said she had to leave him there to go home to the children. So that is a very, very strange incident.
That's crazy.
That's crazy. So as it goes on a little bit more, it's totally crazy. And it says an Argus reporter went to the home yesterday and came away puzzled by the bizarre incident. The man, about 5'3" tall and weighing about 8.5 stone, so he's not a big guy, was standing at the sink about 18 inches wide. So the sink's about 18 inches wide. His wife insists that he was in a horizontal position going through the window and that he was not struggling or thrashing about at all, just going straight through like that, straight out. The pane of glass he went through is 4 feet and 6 inches from the ground. His leap, which shattered the glass but did not break the frame, would be impossible for us from a standing position. He went through a glass pane 32 inches wide and 10 inches deep, touched nothing on the sink in front of him, and tumbled 7 feet 2 inches to the bottom of the back steps. He was not hurt in the fall. He had no soreness that night or the next day. He did not put the light on in the kitchen, and no light was being reflected from the bedroom next door. So it seems like it was a relatively small window above a sink. He has been taken headfirst out through that window in a horizontal position like that, gone out through the window. The glass is broken, and he's landed on the ground. So he couldn't have dived through the window. Like, it was physically impossible. And that's what that was basically trying to say, is it was physically impossible for him to leap up and dive through that window. He's gone through that window like in a completely horizontal position after seeing a little weird round face in the window at the night time without the lights on in the kitchen. What do you make of that?
Well, I have to say that's a very strange encounter, which is what we're all about. But it reminds me of someone else that I spoke to about 20 years ago, where he was out in the evening. He'd had a huge UFO go over him. He was out on a golf course working at night. And anyway, after that, he had this strange experience where he was inside the house, and the next thing he knows, he was being dragged through the wall and ended up outside in the garden. And then all of a sudden, it was like he was flung back, like someone had gotten a rubber band and flung him back, and he just bang straight back through the wall again to where he was. And the interesting thing was, as he went through the wall, you could see the grain of timber, and everything that was the house was built with, nails, wires, everything as he went out, and then boom, he's straight back. So these things happen, and I don't know what it is. It's just bizarre. But I do wonder, maybe could it have been like a side effect? Side effect of proximity to something?
Yep.
I don't know.
No, it's sort of strange, isn't it? He's seen a little face. He's been terrified. He's been sucked out through the window with some sort of a force. The window has actually broken.
Yeah.
So the window's broken. He's hardly suffered any cuts. So, and he landed on the ground like nothing had happened almost. Yeah. Well, not, like there was no, like it wasn't like he tumbled through and hurt his shoulder or hurt his neck or anything. When he's landed on the ground, he's not winded. He's not anything like that. He was scared, but he wasn't actually physically really hurt by the encounter.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and why?
And why? Yeah, and
why?
Why is
what
it?
Was the point?
Is it a failed abduction?
Could be.
Could be a failed abduction, and there is a lot more around that case. Like, I've only sort of sucked the marrow out of that. Like, there's a whole investigation into what went on in Kempsey in that period of time.
Yeah, right.
It was quite a big area of activity. So, a flap, if you will, in the local area. So yeah, really, really interesting report, and I haven't heard of anything else sort of like that. In that sort of a context, like, yes, I've heard of people being taken out through, like you said, through a solid wall and being put back through a solid wall, dematerialize almost, or however they do that. But this is a physical man going through a very small window above a kitchen sink.
And the window was broken. Like in those other cases you're talking about, they often are just floated through, solid timber doors and windows and the glass plane, but it's not broken.
No, and the hard thing with that is you've really only got the witness's word for it, haven't you?
Yeah.
That's not a testable thing on any level. But the glass, she's on face value, she's seen his legs going out the window, so that probably gives strength to that case, because he could have just smashed the window and ran outside for a joke. But if you read the article, it doesn't read like that's what happened and the man was terrified. So
bizarre.
Strange encounters.
Yes.
So
well, we're fulfilling our commitment.
And we are fulfilling our commitment, and we promise to keep dragging them out of the woodwork for you.
We will. So there you go, folks. That's it from us, from Strange Encounters Down Under. I think those are some pretty interesting cases. Ben and I don't talk about UFO case, haven't talked about much about UFO cases, because we've been in it for years, and we sort of wanted to do a few other subjects, cover other subjects, but I think you can't get away from the high strangeness in the UFO cases, as opposed to many of the other strange encounters that are out there. It's just, you just go, where's the logic? It doesn't make sense, a bit like what's happening in the world at the moment. There's no logical thinking.
There's no logical thinking, you're right. And UFOs are such a great material for strange encounters. Like, they really are. Yeah. And they fulfill it on all those levels. Yeah.
So we'll have to do another show down the track on UFOs.
We will, because there's literally tons of information.
Yes.
You can talk for a week about it. You can talk for weeks about it.
Yes. So anyway, thanks for joining me, Ben. Thanks everyone for watching. And if you like this episode, please give it a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe to the channel. Tap the bell to make sure you get notifications of when we upload the next episode to the channel. So until next time, Ben, see you later.
Yep. See you later, Sheryl.
Bye.
Bye.